just repress it because that will definitely make it disappear. It'll definitely
Oh,
go
yeah.
away if you
Totally. Totally. Pray the gay away. That's all it takes. 100% of the proceeds gained from this monetized episode will be donated to sciencesaves.org. Thanks for listening. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me on Growing Up Fundie. I really appreciate you taking your time and sharing your story with us. I was so excited when you reached out. I looked into your story, and without giving too much away before we get started on the episode, you've done so much in such a short amount of time. When I saw your resume, I thought for sure this story was going to start, 2016, 2015, 2014. And some of the most recent stuff has been just 2022. It's so recent for everything you've accomplished and everything that you've got going for you. But without further ado, I'll let you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and get to know you a little bit.
Oh, yeah, of course. First, I want to thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited for this opportunity. And yeah, a lot of my stuff is recent, and I'll definitely get into that into the interview. But for people who do not know who I am, my name is Andrew Pledger, and I am a religious trauma survivor who grew up in the IFB cult. And for people who don't know what that is, it's Independent Fundamental Baptist. And a big part of my story is that I grew up in this environment being gay. I didn't realize it until way later than I needed to. But in that environment, a lot of people are so disconnected from themselves and are controlled and are kept from finding out information that you really don't know who you are, and you're given an identity. And so my story is me grappling with my sexuality, dealing with mental health issues because of religious trauma, eventually ending up at Bob Jones University.
Right. When I got to that part in your bio, I literally went like, "Oh boy, here we go." Yeah.
And really, what I hope people get from my story is that you can become your own hero, because it was really hard, but thankfully I was able to escape all of that and pursue a life that is really healthy for me and best for my healing. And that's what I want people to get. I don't want to push survivors to go one way or do this or do that. I want survivors to look at my story and see their own story and mine and take whatever they need or what they don't need and help give them that guidance on their own journey to healing their religious trauma.
Absolutely. And what I was referencing for those listening earlier when I said your resume is you have done a lot of activism work in terms
Mhm.
of people who have religious trauma, are going through it, have been through it in the past. I saw that you're writing a book, you've got a website, you've been on interviews, you've done like all this amazing work. And so recently, like your journey, a lot of times when people listen to podcasts like this and they hear people's story, that person has like 10 years of
Mhm.
deconstruction under their belt when they're finally ready to share their story and put it out there. Yours is so recent. And that's what I think makes your story so powerful, is that it's still so fresh. It's still
Mhm.
so I don't want to say raw, but like it's still so there in like the
Mhm.
forefront of your life. Like some of the
Yeah.
stuff that you went through happened since the pandemic even hit. Like that's how recent
Yeah.
this was.
Mm.
And so I really wanted to talk to you because I feel like that will help a lot of people who are currently going through this recognize that like they don't have to wait another 15 years to
Mhm.
start this part of their story. And so how did the idea that maybe you didn't want to follow the church that you were raised in, it kind of occur to you? What was the first thing you remember thinking like, that doesn't make any sense, or that's not what I want to be associated with? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, having that thought in that environment is so scary.
So scary. So scary. Yeah.
because it is your entire world, and you're not allowed to have those doubts in the IFB.
Right.
And in these high control groups, there's this thing called phobia indoctrination where they make you so scared of leaving. It doesn't matter what happens on the inside. The inside is always supposed to be better than the outside. And so
Right.
to me, really, I guess it was a slow process to even get to that point, because in that environment, the IFB is like, this is the way, this is the only way, really, to pursue Christianity. And our approach is right. And if we give you this formula and you follow it, your life will be happy, you'll be satisfied. So if there's a problem in your life and you're following what we're doing, well, it must be your fault. You're a sinner. You're not close to God, or God is punishing you. So it's always on you. The organization can never do anything wrong. It's always on the victim. It's a lot of victim blaming in that environment. So for me, really in the beginning, I was homeschooled my entire life.
Right.
I was homeschooled K through 12 for the purpose of being indoctrinated into fundamentalist Christianity. And so the IFB and homeschooling, they were basically my whole world. And even outside of that, I was in a homeschool group, which is still Christian, and then 4-H clubs, which is still Christian. So much control of my environment and what information I was really exposed to, or what was
Right.
really hidden from me. So doubting that, like, oof, you can't
Right.
even. So for me, though, it was really sad that it took me so long to doubt it, really. And I had to go through a lot of difficult mental health struggles to get to the point to even doubt it, because it is insanity. We are told to do the same thing over and over, and it doesn't work. And
Right.
for me, that's what happened. My mental health was really terrible in my teen years. And I was doing everything the IFB was telling me. I was reading my Bible. I was saying Bible verses to make sure Satan went away, because that's what I was told. I
That's
laugh at it now, but
that's
it's
really it
terrible.
though. Yeah, that's
Yes.
so real. Like I was trying to
Hmm.
explain like revelations and things like that to my boyfriend who was not raised religious. And
Oof,
he
yeah.
kept saying like people don't believe that. People don't believe that. Like that's not a thing. That's not real. You're like making fun of me.
Oh.
And like it's that kind of stuff is real. Like pray Satan
Hmm.
away.
Hmm.
I'm not quite sure about your experience. Let me know if it was the same. At least where I grew up in the church that I grew up in, they literally warned you ahead of time that if you had doubts, like that one, you would have doubts, two, when you had those doubts, that was the devil. And so if you leaned into those doubts or if you explored those doubts, that was the devil taking hold on you. And if you did look into it and it did start to make sense, that was more of the devil leading you down that path. And so not only are you terrified because you're like, oh my gosh, this is the devil taking over me, just like they said he would. But then if you start to discover that it makes a lot more sense actually outside of the rules that you're learning, that's even worse. Like you're even more confused because you're like, oh no, this is what they said would happen. Was that like a similar experience?
Yes, exactly, exactly. And again, it's that thought control and like reducing your ability to think to control you. And so, because they tell you this, you have so much anxiety about those doubts, and you try to push them away and do all these things to keep these thoughts hidden away and just not deal with them. And so, I think there were maybe a few moments, maybe later in my childhood, because as I got closer to my teen years, about to enter them, I hated going to the IFB church. I hated it so much. And what I learned is that the more I expressed that, the more my parents would try to indoctrinate me, because
Right. Like you were
that
slipping
was
away.
mhm. And so I learned from a very young age to really just mask and hide my emotions, hide my feelings, just put on because they weren't going to care. They weren't going to try to understand them because they've been taught, oh, just do this thing, this very magical way of thinking, just do this and you'll be fine. And so, when I would go to my parents about emotional problems or different things going on or mental health issues, it was the same thing that IFB Church would say. It was nothing different. They, I mean, really, it was like my parents didn't have any own personal beliefs or ideas of their own. It was just everything that had been fed to them when they had been indoctrinated, and they're just passing it down.
Yeah.
And if it's so isolating, it's so lonely in that environment when you're really suffering in silence.
Right.
And really, I say that a lot because that's going to be the title of my memoir, because I really suffered in silence
Yes.
so much. So me, because like as I started writing my book, I'm like, oh, another situation where I suffered in silence because I wasn't allowed to feel this, I wasn't allowed to experience this, and this was always invalidated. And you can never be a human being in this
Yeah.
environment.
And when you would say, for example, go to your parents or like seek answers from the church in terms of ways to combat your mental illness, what were their version of answers? What was the expectation there, that you just did not have them, or were you supposed to pray more, or it was your fault, or what was their mental health treatment?
Yeah, in the IFB, if you are struggling with your mental health, that is usually a sign that you are not close to God, because if you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, then that emptiness or sadness that you feel will go away. And now looking back on that, I'm like, we're always going to be human. We're always going to have
Right.
hard emotions. And just using this magical thinking to be like, oh, just pray to Jesus or get closer to Jesus, then it will go away. It's very unrealistic, and it causes a lot of people to feel a lot of shame, I
Yeah.
think, because they feel
Absolutely.
like that they are bad because, oh my gosh, like I'm not doing something or I'm not worthy of a relationship with Jesus. And when I had these difficult thoughts, I was always told that they were of Satan. So the Bible was a way to protect against those thoughts. There was no concept or really education of trauma. And when I got older, I realized that a lot of those awful, hateful thoughts that I had towards myself, it was just from the indoctrination that I had been exposed to my entire life of
Absolutely.
telling me I have no worth. I'm a sinner deserving of eternal damnation. That, oh God, he is disgusted when he sees you. So he had to literally kill his son because he's so disgusted by your sin and can't, like, you're so awful. So there's this very early age of just breaking you down into just feeling like you're nothing. Like, so you have to be dependent on this system. And it really models a narcissistic, abusive relationship a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like
Mhm,
most of the people I know, our earliest thoughts and feelings of shame all stem from something we were taught at church. Purity
mhm,
culture, sin, the immortal sin,
mhm,
not being worthy, needing to ask forgiveness. In fact, I don't even think secular media had anything to do with any negative feelings I had about myself until I was well into my 20s, reading
mhm,
magazines and being like, "Oh, I wish I were that skinny." But the earliest shame, like you brought up that word, that's such a powerful word, I think,
mhm,
especially involved in religion, comes from like victim blaming or person blaming. Like, you did this, you brought this on yourself. If you only prayed more, you wouldn't feel like this, or you wouldn't be drawn to do these things. And like, that's not a way to heal people, that's a way to get people to just be
mhm.
quiet and stop talking about it. And, like, if you
Yes.
don't hear about it, it doesn't exist, as opposed to treating whatever the wound is, which the wound is probably from the church, and they don't wanna admit that.
Exactly, and what I've learned is that when your experience doesn't match their beliefs, it causes them a lot of cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
So they have to deal with that, and their way to deal with that is to shame and to blame people. And what I've noticed in these high control groups is that the beliefs will always matter more than the individual people and their problems.
Yes. Yes.
Everything will always be looked through of the lens of the group's beliefs, and you don't really get to know that person for who they are. You have to see them as this sinful, awful person who is saved through grace by Jesus, like nothing more, nothing less. And you don't get to see people for their real humanity. And, you know, as human beings, we've always liked to put things into categories to simplify our world, but not everything fits into a specific
Right.
category. Like there's a lot
Right.
of nuance, there's a lot of grayness in the world, and we need to be able to adapt to that. So these systems they're so rigid in their way. And for me, I think when I talk to people, they're like, what really, in a sense, I hate to use this word, but what really saved me from that environment was my own sexuality, because I did not fit into their rigid system. That just wasn't a part of who I was. And, I didn't even hear the term gay growing up in the church. And so for me, the first questioning of this environment was really when my experience with sexuality did not match what they taught. And so growing up, hearing that God destroyed a city with fire because everyone in it was homosexuals, like for me, like I believed that and I took that in. And like growing up, I was a very homophobic person because that's what I took in around me. So eventually, when I became aware of my own sexuality, that became internalized homophobia. So all those years of being taught to have this hatred towards the LGBTQ plus community was then put to myself. And then I had to deal with the trauma, not knowing it then, but the trauma of that indoctrination and that extreme self-hatred and being unacceptable to God and being really unacceptable to your own family.
Yeah.
Because in that environment, my parents, they took on a very homophobic theology, and I heard them say a lot of terrible things about the LGBTQ plus community, and that affected me greatly. And so again, like at that time, I was not aware of LGBTQI plus. They would use very dehumanizing language. They would
Right.
usually sodomites. That's what I heard the most
Yep.
about.
Yep. Oh gosh. That's so
Yeah.
it's like, man, it's weird because I feel like the traumatized people are the ones that can like laugh about it later. Anybody
Yeah.
listening to this for the first time is like, why are they laughing? We're just like, oh, it's so true. It's just like,
Yes.
and I feel like also we're probably some of the funnier people that people know because of that trauma. But uh, did you come out to anybody before you left the church, or did you keep all of it to yourself until you were no longer associated?
Yeah, that is a really, really good question. And yes, I did end up coming out to a couple of friends when I was 16. Now, when I started becoming aware of my sexuality, it was around like 12 or 13, but I wasn't sure what that was. And for
Right.
so long, I just repressed that and pushed that away like they taught me. Just repress it because that will definitely make it disappear. It'll definitely
Oh
go
yeah.
away.
Totally. Totally. Pray the gay away. That's all it takes.
And so for me, though, again, like I did not have access to Google, like an internet search engine, until I was 17 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
How old are you
And
now?
yeah, I just turned 23
Okay, I
actually.
was gonna guess 23 or 24. I didn't see it actually like listed anywhere. I was curious.
hmm Yeah, and so thankfully though, I can't remember exactly what age, but I found a way to have access to YouTube without getting access to a browser
Wow.
because I think there are some oh yeah, YouTube at that time, I think the app wasn't 17 and up or something like that. So like it went through the parental filter shockingly because like
Wow.
they were very controlling of our devices, which in a sense, I can understand parents doing that because there's so many terrible things on the internet. But the extent to like information control to outside perspective, I think is terrible. Children should be able to
Right.
question, and even like books in general. Like my parents were very controlling of the books that we had when it came to
Right.
information, and that's a
Right.
whole other thing. But
And
I
I think
think,
intent is important there too, because it's one thing to be
mm-hmm,
like, "I'm watching out for my kids so that they don't meet, like,
yeah,
actual pedophiles
mm-hmm,
online." It's
yeah,
another thing to be like,
mm-hmm,
"I don't want my kid to be on the internet because 1, they might question what I've been telling them about God, and 2,
yes,
like, we think that gays are pedophiles, and that's who they might meet
yeah,
online is gays," you know?
uh-huh,
Like,
yeah, that's
the
true.
intent is so different there.
Intent,
Yeah.
yes, most definitely. And so it's interesting though because now that you've hit on that part of it, they talk about trying, for people listening, this in air quotes, protect children. When in these environments, there are children who are in the closet who don't even know it, but they don't have the terms to understand themselves. So then they suffer in silence and don't know what to do, don't know who to talk to. And so that's my issue too with people assuming that when you talk about people's sexual orientation, you don't have to present it in a sexual way at all,
Right. You
period.
yeah, absolutely, like, you can just say, like, men can be married to men, women can be
Yeah.
married to women. You don't have to, like, give them the birds and the bees talk about the whole thing, right? Or the birds and the birds, or the bees and the bees,
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting to me how, like, straight people that are afraid of having the
Mhm.
gay conversation are the ones making it sexual. Nobody else is
Mhm.
trying to make it sexual.
No, and that was the thing too, so many of us stuck in these high control environments because we don't have that access to information, we're confused about ourselves. So, for me, when I figured out that I was gay, I think it was probably right around before I turned 16 or around that time on YouTube. I laugh about this, but BuzzFeed recommended a video. It was like, so it was something like, "Are you gay?" And like the algorithm was like,
Take this quiz, find out.
and so once I started like learning about that, and then realizing that I broke down in tears and just cried myself to sleep that night because I
Wow.
knew what that meant for me going forward, being in that environment, that I would never be loved and accepted. I could never express myself. And I was really worried about my own safety because of how
Yeah,
hateful my parents could be about the LGBTQ plus community and also the church that I grew up in. So you're in this environment and you are scared for your own safety and you're in this state of like hypervigilance
absolutely.
and like, oh, like they cannot find me out, I had to conform, I had to be so perfect. Oh my gosh, because it was just interesting because I remember too, like in my Sunday school class, um my teen Sunday school class teacher, I remember him saying, he's like, yeah, he started talking about homosexuals because that's how they would say that. They're like, yeah, he's like, I'm just not going to talk about that because I know we don't have anyone in this classroom who is that depraved and a terrible human being. And I'm sitting there like, oh,
Wow.
wow. So
Wow.
I'm laughing about it because like,
Right, it's like it's hard not to laugh about it because, like, the
oh,
ridiculousness and also just like, the shock of it all.
mm-hmm,
It's just wild. It's something
mm,
that, like, unless you've been there, like, for that conversation, it's so difficult to wrap your brain around. 1,
mm-hmm,
that conversation happening. 2, that conversation happening with children.
yeah,
With
mm-hmm,
children, and the
mm-hmm,
thing is, like, I feel like with the church and with these morality concepts that they have,
mm-hmm,
you would almost think that they would want you to have access to internet and to be able to question these things in hopes that you would learn about it and learn how to fix it, right? Like you would think I've
mm-hmm,
always wondered, like, if I'm having questions about God, wouldn't they rather me come to God on my own, like look it up and be like, "Oh, that makes sense." Like, but I love God anyway and do it by choice, then be like,
mm-hmm,
"No, I'm going to take all these answers away from you and just tell you that if you try to find them, unless you know for a fact what you're doing is wrong, in which case it makes
mm,
perfect sense to not allow kids to find any research or any internet access to these answers, because
Mhm.
you know what answers they're going to find, and they're the complete opposite of everything you've been saying, and you can't
Mhm.
really defend yourself very well against the points they're about to find. Then it makes perfect sense why you would cut that
Mm.
off and not want them to explore that answer.
Yes, that does make so much sense, and, like, for me too, I didn't realize I grew up in a cult until I got out of it. And I remember growing up, hearing my parents say, like, "Oh my gosh, like this person, they accuse our group of being a cult. Like, that's bullshit. Oh my gosh." And then not even have the conversation about what a cult is and what constitutes a cult and all the criteria and different things. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail yet, but I want to answer your question. I came out to a couple of friends at 16, and again, like, still having that struggle with it, but I couldn't keep it inside anymore, and so and honestly, like, I was forced to come out in a way because I the church I grew up in, I wasn't happy with it, and so I decided to explore. It was another IFB church, so my parents would allow me, so I'm like, "I want a different youth group with people I don't know and can start over and not be bullied." And so when I went to this new youth group in a local IFB church, long story short, someone started spreading rumors about me being gay. And like, it was, I didn't realize it at first, just people started treating me differently one week and just stopped talking to me. And I was confused. So I'm like, oh, like these last few months, like I've really gotten close with these people and I've loved that. I'm like, what is going on? And that's when a friend of mine said, this person is telling people this because, they're jealous that you're new and that you're making friends. They want to be the center of attention. So they knew that this would ruin your reputation, this environment,
Yeah.
and this person could have all the attention they wanted. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I just want to make friends. I just want
Right,
friends.
right. That's wild.
Oh,
And they're literally also putting you in danger, right? It's not just
yes.
rumors, it's not just, "Oh, we're not gonna wanna hang out with him." It's like, they're
Hmm.
literally putting you in danger.
Yes. And so eventually I knew that some of my other friends, I was more worried about them finding out. I then had that conversation, and it was like one of my guy friends from the church I grew up in. When I told him, he just turned so red, and he's like, "Are you?" He thought I was pulling his leg and was joking or something with him, and he just yeah. So honestly, like, it was weird after that. Our friendship can never be the same. So we both moved on, and I don't think he was a terrible person. I think he was still subject to so much indoctrination like me.
Right.
And I think he experienced his own cognitive dissonance because I didn't meet, I guess, what his expectations of what that kind of person would be like. So I think he had to kind of grapple with that on his own. But yeah, I came out to him and I came out to another friend, which she was so supportive, which I was so grateful for. Um, but still, though, having to deal with that, I didn't know how to. It was still so hard to hide that in that environment. And my mental health worsened so much more because as human beings, we need to really truly belong.
Right.
And when you belong in a group, you are allowed to be who you are. It is required that you be who you are. Now, if you're fitting in, you are not belonging to a
Right,
group.
right,
You are
exactly.
not belonging. And so, really, like, Brene Brown's work has helped me so much in learning to find healthy social groups. And that when we're in a healthy social group, we are seen, heard, and we are understood and accepted for every part of ourselves. And so for me, that was so powerful because I remember sitting in my therapist's office and we're talking about what true belonging is. And I sat there and just started crying. I'm like, this is something, wow, I never had this. I never experienced this. And this was a need, an actual human need. And that's the thing. Human needs aren't really a thing in that kind of environment, especially like emotional and psychological. It's just, it's like
Right.
It's just have your basic physiological needs met and then the Bible and you're good.
Right, right. And if some of those basic physiological needs are also against the rules in the Bible. So like only a few of them.
Mhm.
And if you're meeting all
Yes.
of them, don't tell anybody you're meeting all of them. Like keep it to yourself. That's
Mm.
wild. And so did you ever tell your parents? Do you like are you still in touch with them? Did you have to separate yourself from that situation?
Yeah, for me, I kept it to myself and I continued to really suffer in silence. And in addition, just dealing with all the mental health issues from not knowing at the time, but really religious trauma from all those years of indoctrination and really like spiritual, psychological, and verbal abuse after all those years. And also like dealing with a different abuse that I experienced from my parents. And so I knew in order to stay safe, I could not tell them. And so as I got older in high school, I knew the control would not stop because my parents said, we will only help you go to college if you go to a Christian college. And they didn't mean Christian in a general sense. They meant fundamentalist Christian.
Right. They meant like Fundie. Yeah,
Fundie,
that's
yes.
like how it goes, I feel like.
Hmm. And so for me, college was something I'd always wanted to do. I loved learning, and but the options in like fundamentalist Christian colleges, a vast majority of them don't actually prepare you to work in a professional
Right.
workplace. They prepare you to stay in fundamentalism, to be in the ministry, or to stay in this environment.
And some of them aren't even accredited. So like even if you
No.
do get a regular degree, it's pretty much useless
Hmm.
anywhere other than the church.
Yes. Hmm. And so for me, internally at that point, I knew that I was going to leave the IFB. I didn't really know how. And so I was like, okay, I'm like, if I'm going to go to a fundamentalist college, like it has to be accredited. And I'm like, does an accredited fundamentalist Christian college exist? And yes, they do. Bob Jones University.
Gosh. I've
Shockingly.
I've had so many conversations about Bob Jones lately. It's like unreal that this is a real place that exists.
Mm.
Just wild.
And so, for me, I was so scared to go to this place. I'm like, I'm going to be walking on campus and just be hate crimed
Yeah.
immediately. And like,
By
and again,
Christians on a
yes,
fundamentalist campus. Like that's
yes.
gosh.
Yeah. And so for me, just for a little context, like the relationship I had, especially with my mother, was very enmeshed. So I wasn't really an individual and I didn't know who I was without her. We were, she was especially very emotionally dependent on me, and I think fundamentalism really breeds codependent relationships.
Definitely.
Mm,
100%.
as I've met different people, different survivors, and they're like, yeah, I also had a codependent relationship with my mother too, and I'm like, this is a trend. This is,
It's a very, like,
psychologically.
marry Jesus wannabe type situation, almost,
Mm,
which I've
mm,
always wondered if that had anything to do with it or if it's just, like,
yeah.
a subconscious thing, I don't know.
Yeah, that's very true. Because I have thought about that a lot too. Because 'cause I'm like, well, like, we're not really allowed to be our own person, so of course we're gonna
Right.
attach ourselves to someone, and so I didn't have the guts or really, I mean, I didn't really have the autonomy to say to my own mother, I'm like, at first at least, I don't wanna go to a Christian college, and so it was 2 months before I went to Bob Jones that I did finally have the courage to say, I was like, "Mom, like, I don't wanna go to Bob Jones University. I'm really scared," because I don't remember how I said it, but I think I was too afraid to say the word gay, so I'm like, "I don't think I'll fit in there." I'm like, I don't think I'm straight. I'm struggling with my sexuality." I think it's just some of the words I think that I used, and so she was just, I mean, I can understand emotionally for her how it could be a lot. I can definitely understand of, like, your fundy Christian child saying, "I don't wanna go to a Christian college," and then coming out. I know it's a lot emotionally. And so but I didn't realize then was that she was gonna use her own manipulation tactics that she had used on me long before that I never really thought about. But she would put on, basically like a fit, like a child, until she got her way.
Wow.
Just start like crying or sobbing, and it was interesting because as I've gotten older, I realized a lot of it was fake. It was really acting.
Yeah.
And so, she's upset and she was like, "Oh," she's like, "What do you mean? Like, I don't understand." She's like, "Oh," she's like, "You're just confused. You're not at all." And just trying to not really accept me in that moment and embrace me for myself. And so she was like, "Well," she's like, "if you are, then that school, they can fix you. They can help you." Yeah. Yeah, we're
Uh,
laughing.
we talking about the same place here? Because I don't think so.
And so after that moment, I immediately internally regretted. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like, this has caused so much conflict. She's so upset about me not wanting to go to a Christian college. She's now like, I can't even accept my sexuality. And now she's saying these people, that Bob Jones University will fix me or help me." And she she gave me this Bible verse. She's like, "Just resist the devil and he will flee from you."
Resist the devil. It's moments like this I want to say Jesus Christ, and then I remember that's probably not the time.
Yeah.
It's just that's wild. And did your dad
Mm.
even know? Did she tell your dad, or was that maybe even
I
worse for you?
I begged her to not tell him because I don't think he just could have dealt with that. It just We had a tough or really bad relationship growing up, and I don't have time to get into that, but I think part of that was he saw that in me and hated that so much.
Do you think there was ever like maybe anything in his life that he never explored because of fundamentalism and he saw it in you before you saw it in you by chance?
I've I think it's great that you brought that up, and I wasn't going to, but it's fine. I've dug into this with my therapist actually, and I've even talked about this with my younger brother. But I definitely think there were parts of my dad that he wasn't able to explore or acknowledge, and he saw that and really like projection. Like there were parts of himself that he hated that he saw in me, so he projected that onto me and caused a lot of harm me really developmentally and emotionally and psychologically. Um, and so I don't sadly I don't think he'll ever get a chance to get to know himself. He's almost 60 years old. So
Wow.
I know like it's crazy to me to even like say that out loud, but and also like it makes me so sad how my parents, they don't see the harm that it's caused in their lives.
Yes.
And I understand what they get out of it. I understand like death is scary. As human beings, like we need purpose also. So I can see it in their own world, they fit the binary. They're extremely conservative. Their own experiences matches what they believe. And so they've gotten hooked into that. And it gives them that structure in their lives and that purpose. But I've also seen how it's really prevented them from having healthy relationships.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Hmm.
I have always thought that the word belief is interesting because
Hmm.
when you look at Christianity, specifically fundamentalist Christianity, and many forms of evangelical as well, they use this word belief, but then they give examples of people who were basically coerced and bullied into following rules.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so when we talk about like maybe people had aspects of themselves they didn't explore, maybe
Hmm.
he wasn't, necessarily gay or anything like that, but
Yeah.
they love to use the word belief, and then everything about the Bible, none of it is legitimate belief. It's being taught to want these
Hmm.
things, and so I think the reason we see a lot of very bitter, very angry,
Mm.
very, like Westboro Baptist picketing
Mhm.
mad Christians is not because they're actually mad about the sin of the world that they're
Mm.
speaking against. They're mad that they never ever got to even figure out what they wanted. They never even got to figure out what certain sins were like before turning their back on them and renouncing them. They just did what they were told, and they were told that they believe it, and they never actually got a chance to believe it themselves. And so it's
Mm,
like they see our generations, you know, being like, do whatever you want, come to your own conclusions, not realizing that a lot of people would probably still pick Christianity. Not that same type, but I think a lot of people at the end of the day, if they were given the choice, would pick Christianity, but they're never given that choice. And so they're angry and they're upset and they're bitter about it. And when they see those same traits in their children, instead of being happy for them that they're part of a generation that gets to do whatever they want to do and explore themselves, they're mad about it and they tamp it down and they cut them off and they, you know, send them away. And it's just very sad.
mm. Yes, yes, most definitely. Because I think fundamentalism really hinders like normal human development. And there is a time and a place for people to like misbehave in a sense and make some mistakes and do like and not have this rigid structure, like have that freedom
Mhm.
to really express yourself. And it's a part of human development. And when you don't get to do that, and like you were saying again, it's that jealousy in a sense, or the pain that, oh my gosh, I didn't get to be a teenager, I didn't get to be a child.
Right.
And for me, I think that's been one of the hardest things for me in therapy, is realizing, like, grieving the childhood that I never had, the childhood I didn't get, having that sense of safety, but from my early age, just being filled with fear and really coerced and taught from an early age about all of these horrific things about hell, the rapture, and the devil and demons all around you. So like you're in this state of like hypervigilance all the
Yes.
time.
Yeah. At such a
And
young age, at an age where,
mhm,
like, you don't even know how to write your own name yet, but you know that you're going to
mm,
hell.
mm, I know. And like for me, like that's when I got saved. It was like, I say that in air quotes, like it was at 8 years old. Like it was the most horrific sermon on hell I had ever heard. And so of course I was scared. All the adults around me are agreeing with this. And my parents are telling me this is true. So like I'm so scared. And too, like it was so confusing to me because they talked about God being loving and Jesus being loving. There would be all these hateful sermons they would do, these hateful things they would say, and then talk about all these hateful things God did. It just didn't seem to make sense. It was very unpredictable,
Right.
very confusing. And I think too, as I've been in therapy, I've realized that there are things that my own parents, there are things that I've projected onto the idea of God that are from them because of their parenting and my own father. But I realized, I'm like, there are some things that, okay, there are things in the Bible that I'm like, this is actually like, no, this is violent, this is terrible.
Right, right, like, and
Mm,
I think it's funny the juxtaposition between people we know who follow the Bible versus people we know who've actually read the Bible, and it's like 2
mhm,
totally different groups of people, 2
yeah.
totally different groups of people. Um,
Mhm,
do you consider yourself religious at all anymore, spiritual? Who are you now in terms of faith
yeah.
and belief?
I usually tell people now that I'm spiritual but not religious. Um, I'm exploring spirituality because I do believe in some sort of higher power, and I'm exploring what that means for me in like a very open-minded way. Um, I think my definition of God is going to be very different from what I was brought up in.
Right.
But it's something I'm excited that I'm exploring. And for I got I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. So I did leave Christianity publicly altogether, and there were several people, a lot of people that are like, "Oh, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater." And this is what I want to say to people, and I'm excited to talk about this, but about Ginger Duggar's memoir, Free,
Yes.
and Becoming Free Indeed, about distangling fear from faith. That's kind of like the tagline. What I want to talk about first, I want to say there is no one way to heal from religious trauma or trauma in general. when people come to me and ask me about healing, I'm like, there's not going to be a black and white answer or a formulaic thing, because we can't go back to that same fundamentalist structure outside of that religion, because fundamentalism can happen in any group. And so what I say to people, if you still want to be a part of Christianity and that's actually good for your mental health, then do it. But it's not going to be the same case for everyone. Some people,
Right.
the trauma is so ingrained, they cannot disentangle that fear from their faith. And maybe they discard that and find a different spirituality or a different concept, or maybe they leave altogether and don't believe, and that's good for their mental health. So there are different healing paths for people. And really, I'm not going to read Ginger Duggar's memoir, but because I know her background and
Yeah.
how she's still in a high control group and she doesn't know
Yes.
it.
Yes. 100%.
And it really, and what I've heard from other people online is that in her book, she does shame people who leave the faith.
Yeah.
And that really disappoints me. And I know I'm happy for her. If she wants to have her faith, and that's great for her mental health, that's great. But then when you get to the point to shame people who didn't follow your same path, that fundamentalism, like, come on, Ginger, that fundamentalism is still in there. I
Yep.
see it.
Yep. Once a Fundie, always a Fundie, unless you admit. Like step one is admitting you're a Fundie. Like, yeah, yeah,
And so, I think, if what Ginger, if she wants to do that, that's fine, that's great. And that works for her, that's awesome. But another thing that has really disappointed me with her journey is that she will not openly call the IBLP a cult.
that's the other thing is I thought the book was going to be like Spare. I thought it was going to be this
Mm-hmm.
this rejecting where they've come from, their background, like spilling the
Mm-hmm.
tea, all that. And it's just this weird thing where for people like us looking on the outside, we're like sis, you're not done yet. Like you
Yeah.
think you're
Mm-hmm.
done. This book was written from somebody who thinks they're done with their
Yeah.
journey and they think they're at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the road. It's like, girl, like you're not even calling it what it is. Like step 1, call it what it is.
Yeah.
It's a
Mm-hmm.
cult. Like it's a cult. Just say
Yes,
it's
it
okay to
is.
say it. And it's okay
Yeah.
to admit that like that was part of your life for so long.
Mm-hmm. And to me, like, again, it is like cult education, I think, is so important in the recovery process, because it also prevents you from getting in similar groups, even if they're Christian or not. A book club can become a cult.
Yep.
A yoga studio or whatever could become a cult. Any social group has the potential to become a cult if the dynamics come into play.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to learn to protect ourselves from that. And so Stephen Hassan's bite model, how far do they go to control your behavior? How far do they control your information? Do they try to control how you think, what you think? Do they try to control your emotions and how you interpret your emotions? How far does each of these categories are they controlling?
Right. Right. And to go from a controlling church and it's like and I don't mean this in a make fun sense, but like
Mm-hmm.
you post pictures of yourself in shorts on Instagram, that doesn't mean you're done, like, getting out. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't mean you're done. And, so I had a gentleman on, this podcast a while ago who actually survived 3 severe cults.
Wow.
And he was talking about how a lot of times you think when you escape a cult, I'm done,
Mm-hmm.
I'm free, it's never going to happen to me ever again in my life, woohoo.
Mm-hmm.
When what you don't realize is you are susceptible to being brought,
Yes.
just like you said, right back into another cult. It could be
Mm-hmm.
CrossFit, it could be veganism,
Mm-hmm.
it could be a
Yeah.
friend group, it could be a mommy group, it could be
Mm-hmm.
any kind of group. And like when you've got that like scent on you because you're not
Mm-hmm.
quite sure how to protect yourself yet, you just got out and you're very vulnerable, they come
Mm-hmm.
like sharks in the water, right? And the next thing you
Yeah.
know, you're in a controlling relationship or, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, a group of some kind. And so that's my fear for people like her who they think because, like, oh, I'm dressing how I want now. My husband lets me dress how I want now. We had kids when we wanted to start having kids. Like, we live in California. I'm no longer part of this cult. It's like, girl, we all like, you are. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
different one. Like, no
Yeah.
shade to her husband, but it's just a
Mm-hmm.
different one. Yeah.
Yes, and so and that's an interesting thing too, is because when I left the IFB and then, I really jumped to Bob Jones University. Bob Jones University is definitely a cult.
It's a cult.
Like,
Yes. It's a cult. It's just like teaching people how to bring others into the cult. Yeah.
yes, and so again, when I went to college, I still had no cult education because I had such this black and white extreme view
Right.
that I'm like, oh, like I'm not locked in a cabin in the woods somewhere. Like I'm not in a cult. Like it's
Like, I'm
okay.
not trying to wash Jesus's feet with my long hair. I'm not in a cult.
Because I think the media plays a big part in people's misconceptions about cults,
Right.
and I feel like the one documentary I think that I've come across that's helping people to understand that is The Vow, which is on HBO about
Right.
Nixium. It goes into how that actually happened. And I highly recommend it for people. But going back to Bob Jones, when I went to Bob Jones University, at that point, I knew I was done with fundamentalist Christianity and like the IFB. But I've been in that environment my whole life. How do you get out of that when all your connections are in that environment? So here I am in this high control environment, and they control what churches I go to. I'm required to be in a discipleship group that meets 4 nights a week.
Wow.
I'm required to go to chapel the 4 days a week that's in session, and all these different things, and they keep you so busy and so exhausted at that university. And I've taught to different students, and I'm like realizing like, it is a cult. Like the high control behavior, the control of the information. Like there were books that were censored at that school too. Like there were literally books of like tape was you would open a book and it'd be tape over certain parts of it and certain things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, people, like, no, this is too much. And to me, like the controlling what church you went to, like, oh, we know the right kind of church. So here's a list of churches. And the churches, they aligned with Bob Jones' doctrine. So here I am at Bob Jones University, and my whole life I had always been a rule follower. Always been, because I felt so much anxiety about breaking the rules because there's so much fear around that, because that authority figure, that's a representative of God. God put them in your life. They put them in that position. If you disobey them, you're disobeying God. And there's so much fear around it. So when I got there, I tried to blend in. Tried a gay guy at Bob Jones University doesn't sticks out quite a bit, but I thought I could blend in, and I really didn't. And I remember again, like before, not for too long, like people started spreading rumors about me being gay, and I'm like, I was just so fed up. I'm like, I'm so tired of this happening. Like, I need a true community. And so, after like a couple of semesters of being just bullied and harassed by a lot of people, and like, I wasn't able to tell anyone at Bob Jones I was being harassed and bullied, because I would be the one who would get in trouble for
I was
that,
gonna
not the
say,
people doing the harassing
yeah, they'd be like,
against me.
"Well, what were you doing? Well, what were you like? What were you dressed like? What were you saying? Like, why would people call you gay if you're not gay?" Like, that's what would happen. They'd be like, "Well, are
Mm.
you? Like, are you acting like it?"
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, up until that point, it was another high control environment. But again, I didn't have my parents watching my every move. So I'm like, I have to find a way to actually like survive this environment. And so after, I was thinking it was during my second semester there, I went to an affirming church, and it was not on the church list I was allowed to go to. So I had
Not
to
on the
keep it as
approved
not
church
the
list.
approved. Yes. So it was on the blacklist. The
Oh no.
yeah. And so I went there all by myself, taking an Uber because I didn't have a car. And I was like, I don't know anyone at this place. I don't know, like, and it was really sad because it was a week before going to that church. I had nearly taken my own life because I was so depressed. I
Wow.
was so hopeless. And so I was glad that I was able to have that strength to even get past that and just try a completely different environment. And so here I am still like struggling with depression, all these different mental health issues, like nearly taking my life the week before. And I'm like, oh, like, can I find something? And so I was so grateful to be able to meet a family there who lived across the street from Bob Jones University, actually. And they were really liberal and progressive, and the opposite of what I grew up in. Like,
Was the land, like, cheap? Why would they live there? Like, was the real estate just really low? Like, what?
I know it's crazy to me that I found them, but once I met them and they got to know me, they really like took me in as their own, and I would walk to
Wow.
their house, and like it was crazy to me how when I was at their house, my mental health was so much different because I finally got experience outside of that high control environment, and then comparing that, and the interesting thing was these people, they weren't Christians.
Wow. That's even wilder. I thought they were just, like,
Yes.
mild Christians.
No, and so
Wow.
they just love exploring different denominations and learning different things. And the mom of the family, she considers herself a follower of Christ. She loves Christ's teachings, but she doesn't believe in heaven. She doesn't believe in hell. She doesn't even believe that Jesus is God. She just loves his example.
Wow. That's wild. That's, like, boggling my mind.
And to me, I was like, this is theologically against everything I've been taught. And these people are supposed to be bad because they don't believe the same things. So that cognitive dissonance from that experience, I was just having to grapple with that and finally being like, the Fundies are wrong.
And isn't it interesting that people who follow religious teachings are the ones who make you feel in danger,
Mm,
excommunicated, ostracized, evil, horrible, and the
yeah.
one that's not religious at all and just follows Jesus's teachings is the one that makes you feel welcome and
Mm,
loved and included.
yes.
Interesting how that
Yes.
works.
I know. And as I'm still deconstructing, but in my deconstruction journey, I realize a lot of people in the Fundy movement are really followers of Paul. They love Paul.
We love us some Paul. And for anybody listening, what who maybe didn't grow up like fundamentalists or like Christian, what do you mean by that?
Paul was very heavily emphasized on rules and don't do this, don't do that. A very sexually oppressed individual, and he
Yeah.
wanted to do the same to all of us.
Yeah, yeah, Paul was the one that was like, and don't touch yourself or you go to hell. And don't dream about it, and don't let other people dream about it, or you're all going to hell." Like, this dude was, man, I remember,
Legalistic, yes.
yeah, I
Hmm.
remember, like, I don't remember if it was in college or where we did, like, a little study on Paul, and it was just like, I think this dude was just, like, a virgin who really wanted to lose his virginity. Like, I think he was just an incel, like, the OG incel. No, women would not sleep with him, so he just
Mm,
made it, like, a sin to do any of
yes.
the fun stuff.
Exactly. And so again, like dealing with that, and it was really hard trying to be in both worlds, but it was good for me to have that connection and that experience outside of it. But as I continued in college and finally able to like to get in a dorm where I was away from those people who would arrest me and avoid them, I found my place, especially in the art department at the school, which isn't a shocker. Like, hate to stereotype, but the art department, that is where it's at. Like, that's where the gays are
"Hey,
at.
guys. Hey, what's up? Can I join?"
Yes. And so for me, if I had to go back in time, I would still go back to Bob Jones because that's where I met my best friend.
Wow.
We
That's not
met
at all what
my
I thought you would say.
I know, like that's where I met like my best friend, and like we have a lot of the same struggles in dealing with our own upbringing. And this friend of mine, she also grew up in a very big IFB church, so we both had that experience, and she's very loving and very accepting. And so as I go on through my college career, I'm still struggling with all these mental health issues. And so as I began doing more research, eventually I came across the term religious trauma. And once I actually learned about it and really understood, and like for people who are listening, I just want to give a definition. But religious trauma, it is a group of symptoms that arises in response to traumatic or stressful religious experiences, and common This is common among people who have escaped cults, fundamentalist groups, abusive religious settings, or other painful experiences in religion. And different symptoms are like reduced ability to think, trouble making decisions, anxiety, anger, depression, grief, nightmares, disassociation, feeling lost, and many symptoms of like PTSD. And religious trauma is really comparable to complex PTSD, but this trauma is done in a religious context and under religious teachings. And so once I understood this, that, oh my gosh, like I have this broad term to understand all these mental health struggles that I'm dealing with, all the depression, the anxiety, the rapture anxiety, all these different things. And that's scary though. And I was like, and it's devastating because you're like, everything that I was indoctrinated to believe has done so much harm. Like the anger, the betrayal, the sadness, the despair. Like, how do I even get over this? So I kind of avoided it for a while. I ignored it. I repressed it, which is just what I'd always been taught to do.
Right.
And so, long story short, as I went on in my college career, it just started doing some questioning and deconstructing. I ended up leaving Christianity my junior year at Bob Jones. I was finishing my third year there, and that was, oh my gosh, when was that? I guess that was the spring of 2021. That was when
Wow.
I had internally already left Christianity and dealing with the effects of that trauma still, and not, and it was still hard to not be dependent on that system. Like it was
Yeah.
just it's a mind fuck, really, like so much. And but because what brought me to the point to leave that was I went through biblical counseling at Bob Jones University, and it turned into conversion therapy there.
Right.
And so, which I knew it eventually would, but I agreed to go into biblical counseling because I really wanted to try to understand at least from a one-on-one, because to me, like I was like, we didn't really learn about the Bible. We were just shamed with a bunch of rules all the time. And I was like, I really want to understand. And so once I started learning more and more, and I really, in my own mind, it really helps me leave Christianity. And then that wasn't the purpose for that person who was giving me biblical counseling. But for me, I think I realized I can love and care about people outside of this system.
Absolutely.
And I'm like,
100%.
you know what? I'm like, I don't have to be a Christian to love Jesus's teachings or to follow his teachings or to just care about people. So I'm like, I don't, and they hate that freedom mindset because then you don't conform to their system. They can't
Right.
control you. And
Right.
so at that point, spring of 2021, I had internally left. Now here I am. I'm like, all right, like we have to deal with this religious trauma. So I was a photography major, or I mean, it was visual studies, but like a concentration in photography. And so I used photography to explore religious trauma. So it was the fall of 2021 that I started making a photo series on religious trauma and going through the emotional states of that.
And like for anybody listening, just to recap, fundamentalist school. Like
Yes.
you're doing a project on religious trauma, literally
Mhm.
in the lion's den.
Yes.
So just wanted to
Yes.
just like for the audience who may not understand like the weight of what's going on here, this part of the
Mhm.
story.
Yeah, and so it was really like my senior project. I'm like, all these, these 3 years, I'm building these skills, and I'm like, I want this to be so personal and so real and authentic because I haven't been able to do that or be that. And so, really, the series. Do you hear those loud noises?
No. If I did, I
Perfect.
probably thought it was on my end or something.
Got you. Just want to
Yeah.
make sure. Okay. So for me, I wanted to do the series in between like 10 to 15 photos. And I was like, how do I do my entire life, these emotional, like 10 to 15 photos in a series? And so I decided to really make the story. I wanted to have an ambiguous meaning for all kinds of people with religious trauma. I didn't want it to be very specific interpretation. I wanted to seem like it had a specific meaning for me, but I wanted people to take it in a broader way for what that might mean to them. And so this series shows this individual who is locked in like this kind of like dungeon type room, and all the information they have is like a Bible, and they have a cross on the wall, and that's like basically it. And they're just deprived in this environment. And throughout the series, it shows this person, they're locked in this room. And throughout the series, there is a key around the person's neck, but the person doesn't know what it is or what to do with it. And so as the series goes on and this person is struggling with their mental health, dealing with the fears of hell, with spiritual warfare, and it's just falling deeper and deeper into depression and anxiety, this person finds like this hidden book, and in it is a picture of a key, and it's showing them what a key does. And so in that moment, that was kind of for me like learning other information outside the system. And the key represented this person's autonomy. And so once the person realized, oh my gosh, like I have autonomy, I have choice, in the end the person puts the key in the keyhole and they leave the room. And when I ended it like that, it was powerful. But when I typed out the caption online, I'm like, this is not really the end of the story, because there's so much more. Now that they're gone, there's so much healing that needs to be done after leaving this environment. So for me, it was realizing the decision that I was about to make publicly.
Yeah.
And this led me up to the point of being interviewed by Joshua Harris. And for people who don't know who he is, he wrote the very popular book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, heavily influenced purity culture and had his own cult following. And I reached out to him and I was like, this is a series I want to promote. I want this to reach people. I'm like, would you mind interviewing me on your show? You do live on Instagram. And he agreed to it. And so I was really scared, honestly, because I was still at Bob Jones. This was my first time sharing my story, being authentic, sharing this series. But to me, at that point, I was done suffering in silence. And it was like the first time that I'm like, you know what? I am going to meet my psychological, my emotional needs. This is something I need to do. And I don't care about the consequences of this, because my own emotional well-being is more important than conforming to this system. And at that point too, as I started to learn to claim my autonomy, I felt a lot of shame for being in that environment for so long, about being at Bob Jones for 3 years. And I'm still learning to have compassion for myself and understanding all the coercion that was involved in the indoctrination. But I was like, it's time to claim my autonomy, claim my identity. So I did the interview, and it was like around 10 days after that interview, I was just beginning my last semester at Bob Jones University, and I was expelled from Bob Jones because of it, my last semester. And so it was amazing, because the family that I had met in Greenfield, who was my support system, once they found out about the interview, they were like, we think you're going to get kicked out. Just letting you know that if you do, you can come here and you don't have to go back to the environment that you grew up in. And when I was expelled, I called them, was like, yeah, I'm like, all right, I got expelled. I'm like,
Wow.
I'm walking down to meet with my dorm supervisor right now. And I know this is probably what's going to happen, but just letting y'all know. And so, yeah, I was kicked out of Bob Jones University. And I mean, it was still hard to happen, but
Oh yeah,
I
for
was
sure.
proud of myself, because I was able. I'm being true to myself and my identity, and claim my autonomy, and I'm no longer in this abusive environment. And I don't have to have Bob Jones University on my resume,
Right.
also, which is really
I took
nice.
a 3-year gap in between schools. I just, I focused on photography and social
Yeah.
media.
Yes. And so when that happened, I immediately started searching therapists. I'm like, I gotta go to a therapist. Like,
That's so smart. I'm so glad you did
mhm.
that because so many people from that background, that's like the last thing they would do because they've been told their whole
Mm.
lives that's not the way you do it.
And like for me, I was told that, but like at that point, I had done enough research on like general psychology. And it's like, okay, like I need to do this. And since I left that environment, I wasn't threatened by different worldviews,
Right,
honestly.
right.
So I was like, I need to heal. This is what I need. And so, and a lot of people are curious, like, how do your parents, react to that? Because of course I had to make the phone call and tell them that their perfect child who had followed every single rule their entire life was kicked out of Bob Jones University.
That's wild. So I love that you like smile every time you say you were kicked out of Bob Jones. I just think that's that like that just like chef's kiss. Perfect.
Yes. And they were speechless when it happened. And they didn't really know what to say at first. It was just silence for a long time. And they were like, why? And I was like, well, I openly, like, I told my story about religious trauma in this environment. And I left Christianity publicly because that's what I need for my mental health, and it's caused so much harm to me. And so, of course, like, they're upset. They're like, "Are you coming back to live with us?" I'm like, "No, I'm not."
Did they
And
say did they want to know why or did they kind of already know why?
they did not ask why, but I said I told them, I'm like, I have to be in a healthy environment, and it's not healthy there, so I'm not coming back. And I told them, I'm like, I'm living with that family that I met. I will be fine. Do not worry. But they still did, which I understand from the parents' from their perspective why they
Yeah.
would still be worried. But leaving that, like, after I think it was a week after I got kicked out, and I had left Bob Jones, and I was like, you know what, like, I'm taking a break from life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I was like, I'm not worrying about school right now. I'm not worrying about a job right now. Let me continue to just breathe and be human and just be in therapy. And I love to read, so I got to like read so many books during that short break during that time. And it was really upsetting to me because a week after I was expelled, my parents, they called me and they told me, they're like, you have bipolar disorder. You need to get on medication right now. You need to go to a doctor and get on medication.
Wait. So now mental health professionals and getting mental health help is acceptable?
That made me so angry. I had never been more angry in my entire life when that happened,
Like,
because having them gaslight me and invalidate me all those years, and now they're like, go to a psychiatrist, get on medication, you're bipolar, this is why you did this, this is your fault, blah blah blah. And I was just livid. And it was really, they were trying to psychopathologize me because they didn't want to be held accountable or deal with their own parenting or the things that they did or the harm that they caused.
or the fact that you had been asking for mental health help for a
Yeah.
very long time and had been told that
Hmm.
there is no such thing and that you need to pray more.
Yeah. And I told them, I'm like, I need therapy. I'm like, and at that time, I had already been on antidepressants for a year. And that was so hard for me to even get on because of their strictness. Like, it was so hard. And so I told them, like, I've been on enough pills. I'm like, they can help me, but like, they're not going to heal this trauma. And I'm like, I don't expect you to understand that right now. And I'm like, I'm not going to talk to y'all about it because y'all are just going to invalidate and do all this shit. So just please help me pay for therapy to get through this shit. And they did help me pay for
Wow.
therapy, which I was really happy with. And
Yeah.
one of the things that they were worried about, they were worried that I was going to cut them off. And I thought they were going to cut me off immediately. So I was surprised because in the past, we had cut off a family member who publicly left and came out of the closet, and it didn't turn out well. So I think they had learned from that. But they were like, can we have a relationship? And I chose to still have contact. And for people listening, every situation is different.
Right.
My parents, thankfully, I had set my boundaries. They I don't know, obey those boundaries. They didn't cross those boundaries, and they were still able to respect me. And they don't send me a bunch of a Bible verse shit like some parents do. So they, once I told them like no Bible verses, no sending me sermons, don't do any of this shit. Like, don't, you can't bring up these certain topics to me. You can't talk about heaven or hell or the devil. Just stop with the fear and the coercion. So once I set those boundaries and they didn't cross them, that is why I stay with them. And I know that's not the case for everyone.
No,
And
yeah, absolutely.
every situation is different, and going no contact, if that is up to you and you know the situation, that's the right decision for you.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
just want to make that clear, I guess, for people. But because I respected those boundaries, I stayed in contact with them. And as I really, when I went public with that photo series and Joshua Harris, I was like, you know what? I'm going to continue telling my story online and giving people resources. And I was really happy because I didn't realize that the interview would gain a lot of traction on campus. I tried to block a lot of Bob Jones people before the interview happened so that it would try to prevent me from being expelled. But anyways, it still happened. And so a lot of students, and I think why those students gravitated towards it, because I told the truth.
Well, also, it's interesting because he also deconstructed, right? Like he
He
wrote that
did.
bombshell book that like
Hmm.
changed the face of purity culture and then later walked it back and was like, actually, no, I was wrong.
No.
I'm so sorry. So it
Yeah.
makes me wonder, why were so many people listening to that podcast?
I know
Unless
that's the interesting thing.
hmm,
Yes. Hmm.
maybe you're not the only person on that campus who secretly,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
secretly kind of
Yeah.
understood
Hmm.
and what's the word I'm looking for? Related to the
Deconstructing.
content.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. And so because I actually like talked about religious trauma, talked about deconstructing, and openly talked about the harm fundamentalism causes, you're not allowed to talk about those things on campus or about
No.
that institution. And so it's interesting because when I tell people that's why I got expelled from a university, from that standpoint, yeah, that doesn't make sense. But from the idea of a Christian cult, that does make sense. Kicking you out for differences in opinions and beliefs, and even just expressing anything that goes out of alignment with the indoctrination that they have pushed for so long.
Right?
And so, really, like it was amazing to me to how many BJU students reached out to me were actually supportive of me. It was really like I expected so much hate, so much backlash, and I was emotionally ready for it. And I was surprised at students were like, they didn't bring their religion into it. They're like, I'm so sorry you went through all these terrible things for so long. I hope you're able to heal from all of this. And so as I went on that journey, and even like before that interview, I had already decided, and it was crazy to me because it was my senior year, but I decided to completely change career paths to pursuing psychology.
That's awesome.
To And I'm excited for it. Like I switched my major to a general studies psychology major, and I'm almost done now. I
Yes,
started
that's
I
awesome.
I started back in June as a senior all over again, and I'm graduating in May of 2023, 1 year later, but I'm still graduating.
From Bob Jones?
No, from SNHU. That's
Oh,
where I
okay. I was like,
transferred.
wait. I was like,
No,
whoa. They let you back. Like, whoa. They let you back. Like,
no.
whoa.
So yeah, I transferred
Fun.
90 of my Bob Jones credits to SNHU, and I've been finishing
That's
um
fantastic.
through them. So I'm so excited. And another great thing too of like being authentic and leaving that environment is that I work for the Indoctrination podcast. I'm their social media manager. It's hosted by Rachel Bernstein. She's a cult
Yeah.
expert, and really like her reaching out to me really, I think, was a big part of digging into cult education. I don't know if I would have if she would have ever reached out to me and hired me to work for her, because part of my job is listening to the podcast. And once I started learning about all the different cults, all the different groups, started seeing the same dynamics, I'm like, I am seeing some connections
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. I think true crime podcasts and like true crime culture has given people like an idea of what a cult is.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so difficult for people who are in cults to really believe they're in cults because it's like,
Hmm.
oh, like this doesn't seem like, Jim
Hmm.
Jones. This doesn't seem
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
The guy who did the Hollywood murders, the famous one,
Yeah.
Han
Mhm.
Hansen. I was about to say Hansen. Jim
Yes.
Henson killed nobody. Jim Henson did not kill anybody. um, but although Muppets could be a cult, I'll do an episode on that another time. But so what do you see in your future? Like, what are your goals, your
Mm.
aspirations? What do you hope happens for you in
Mm.
the future? I mean, the
Yeah.
next 5 years?
Mhm. Yeah, so I wanna become a therapist. So, as I'm almost graduating with my bachelor's, I think I am gonna take a break because
Yeah,
I think I need another, like, gap for healing. I've been in therapy only a year, which is not that long, and there's so much more healing, that needs to be done through that. And so I think hopefully, um, I'm not sure exactly yet, but I know I do, not sure when, but I do want to, get my master's in clinical mental health and become a therapist. And I do want to eventually become a psychologist, which means, I'll have to get a doctorate degree in that. And I do want to could really help continue research in religious trauma because there's not enough yet. And thankfully, I do see like Dr. Laura Anderson, like she is a pioneer in the
right,
area of, I feel like, Marley Winnell, she was like the first person I think to help pioneer that, but Dr. Laura Anderson, she's another person that has really like continued, like just passed that torch down to continue that. So I hope we can bring more awareness to it and really because there's no therapy modality to specifically help religious trauma survivors. So I hope to be a part of helping really develop that modality so that we can specifically meet the needs of religious trauma survivors. And also, it doesn't have to be an attack on religion. It can help people learn what is unhealthy
right,
in these groups. And we need to learn how to prevent religious trauma so we don't have to have these people in the mental health offices getting help for this. So
right.
we have a long way to go with it, but I hope that I'll be able to be a part of that.
That's awesome. And like based on just what I've seen on your personal website alone, like I have no doubt that you will do
uh
that and more in the next 5 years. Like
Thank
what
you.
you've done since like 2020, I can't even imagine what you'll have done by 2028. But if somebody wanted to find your work, or if they wanted to find work that you recommend, or if they wanted to learn
Mhm.
kind of more about what you're talking about, what resources would you direct them to? And anything you mention, I'll link in the comments so they can
Mhm.
find it.
Yeah, so just look me up on social media and in my link tree. I specifically have like a resource page on my website for that. It's been so helpful for me, helping people learn about trauma, mental health, religious trauma, spiritual abuse, co-education, just all these different categories to help people through these different issues and having it all in one place. So if you want to learn more about these concepts and different things, that is the place that I recommend.
Awesome. Perfect. Andrew, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your evening. I love that in both of ours, you can see like the sun gradually going down for both of us. Like it's like dark. It looks like we're doing some like horror podcast.
Yes.
Um, but I've really, truly enjoyed your time and your story. I can't even imagine how scary and
Mm,
unsure things were for so long for you, and you're so fresh out of it, and at the
mhm,
same time you seem very
mhm.
confident in your choices and very
Yeah,
sure in the
mhm.
direction that you're headed. And I'm sure that there's the unknown future ahead, but you
Yeah.
seem just so like wise beyond your years. And
Aw,
so
thank you.
I really want to tell you that I appreciate your story and I appreciate all the work that you're doing to help people who are
Mm.
coming from similar backgrounds than yours. And I'm so glad to be a little blip on your timeline of
Aw.
activism and work that you're doing to help people that are just like you.
Aw, thank you, that's so sweet, and I'm also so glad that we were able, to connect.
Absolutely, absolutely. When I read your story, I was like, "Oh, done, done." Like oh, also, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, "I had a guest send me a Calendly," and they were like, "Oh yeah, I love Calendly," and I was like, should I be on Calendly? I was like, should I? Because that was amazing. You like sent me a calendar link to that was amazing. So I think I'm gonna get a
Mhm.
Calendly just because your
Yes.
organization like made me self-conscious. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, I just got off Zoom. I literally just got off Zoom. Should I get on Calendly too? Is this what grown-ups are doing? But yeah, thank you again. I know that I've held you longer than I said I would, but I really enjoy your story, and I will link your link tree and your website and everything in the comments so people can find it in the description. And I wish you the best. And I look forward to seeing everything that you
Aw,
do from here on out.
aw, thank you so much.